I'm Alex Jarrett, and I want to introduce you to this short film. Last year, Eva, Tim, Pat and I had tea at the Ritz in London to celebrate Eva's 80th birthday. We hatched a plot to visit Berlin together, call it a nostalgia trip, to see as many of the addresses we could find where family members had lived or had other connections, such as being designed by the architects in the family. We went in April 2005, and this film shows what we found. A word of caution though, Berlin's infrastructure suffered terribly in the war. Some 75% of the city was destroyed, so we have to try to guess whether the building we're looking at is original, a restoration back to originality, or indeed a completely new structure. I think everybody knows the people I mention in this film and how they fit together in the family tree. However, with regard to the two architects I mentioned, I would just say that Theodore was born in 1874 and died in 1933. Hans, my uncle Hans, was born in 1890 and died in 1956. They therefore lived through some of the most interesting times architecturally. Art Nouveau, Art Deco, Bauhaus. You can see these influences in their work. Uncle Hans continued his career as an eminent architect in London, once he was no longer able to practice in Germany. In the family, there are and were a number of other architects, and it is a profession therefore in which they obviously excelled and were comfortable with. Even today, the family embraces Frank Jarrett, who went on to great things in South Africa, Norman, his son who practices in the United States, and Claude, who was a successful architect in Canada until his retirement recently. I am, of course, an amateur photographer, so the film is not perfect. It does, of course, include a little sightseeing, and it finishes in Wannsee, at the very birthplace of the worst evil man has ever perpetrated to his fellow man. I hope you enjoy the film. When it is finished, there is a series of stills of the buildings concerned. Thank you. No. This is number 2 Meinecke Straße in the centre near Charlottenburg. This is where Uncle Hans and my father lived as children, and where their father Samuel died. I think this is, however, a modern house. Can't imagine that this is the house they actually lived in, but this is the place. Isebrechtstraße on the corner of Clausewitz, and this house, number 5, right on the corner here, was designed by Theodor Jaretzki, who was an architect like Uncle Hans was. It's a very lovely house, I must say. It's a beautifully designed house on the corner. That charming gentleman is Raza, who's driving us around the town. Now this house is Mommsenstrasse 29, where my father lived. What year? And whether this is the original house or not, we can't tell. It looks it. But on the other hand, some of the houses in this road do look a little older. Filming Mommsenstrasse number 30 because this is a really old original house. It looks lovely. Could do with a clean-up. These fantastic iron balconies. Satellite dish. And this road is the Wilmersdorfer Straße, and we swing back round to Mommsen 29. Filming now is at Zübelstrasse number 35, and somewhere in this house my grandfather Samuel and my grandmother Anna and Hans and Alfred my father, and Hans my uncle, lived. This was the family home at number 35 Zübelstrasse. As with all the houses in Berlin, you can't be sure whether they are as they were or whether they've been restored or rebuilt because of damage in the war. Eva says her mother, Auntie Grete, lived at number 2 Zübelstrasse, so we have to head back to the other end. The very beginning of Zübelstrasse, which we've just been to the far end of. And this old building under scaffolding, and it really is an old building, is apparently where Auntie Grete lived. That's Eva's mother. And we'll just walk up the road here to have a look at the unscaffolded bit and see if that's still number 2, or even if it isn't, just to get an idea of what this house looked like. Some debate about whether this is the house, because this house is actually Sophie Charlotte Oberschule, Gymnasium, founded 1857, and that sound in the background is Tim telling us that actually the place we need is 22. So we filmed this beautiful house, not completely in vain, because it's such a lovely place. And it looks like it's being restored, which would be great news.
Mum and your dad were just living almost
driving up Zübelstrasse.
Huh?
Yeah.
That's what
they definitely
that's
knew
how
each
they
other.
met.
The families knew each other. Well,
Would they have moved there together?
It's very nice that there's so many trees around.
Would they have moved at the same time to be near each other?
No, because my grandfather didn't want my mother.
So Auntie Grete lived at
So it was a coincidence.
29, which is just 6 doors away from number 35, where we were earlier, and where the family home was.
40. And he probably thought my mother was good enough.
Yeah, he was very status oriented.
Yes.
That's for sure.
Yeah. And here we are coming up to Mommsen 29 again. This is Zübelstrasse again, and that's number 29 where Auntie Grete lived. And if I pan left, I'm coming up to the end of the road there, and at the far end there where that red car is, on the left again is number 35, where we were earlier. So everybody obviously lived pretty close to each other, and when they moved, they didn't move far. 39 opposite, because it's a beautiful Art Deco style house.
Oh,
That's a lovely picture.
here with this.
Some lovely friezes. And details.
One, two, and three.
Lovely.
This,
Look,
this is the Lietzensee.
and look, over there, there must be a way in.
It's a foggy, isn't it?
Yeah, that's where we went.
Eva used to come here as a child
Then we went.
There's a way down.
with her brother Klaus,
And there was a
and she says he was bad to her because he wouldn't help her put her skates on.
That's over there. There's over
And we
there.
sat on some steps and put the skates on, and then we started skating.
That is the place. There's a weeping willow down there.
Over there is a place on the Lietzensee where you can walk down a few steps, and then you sit on the steps, and you, when you were children, and you put your skates on. And my brother was always very quick, and his skates went on like lightning, and he was off. And I was sitting there winding my skates on and worrying about not finding him again and rushing off to do the skating. And so we skated round the Lietzensee, which was fantastic. And then one day there was a huge hole where the Lietzensee had not frozen, and I managed at the last minute to escape because I practically fell into the water. And that was it. We love the Lietzensee.
I'm filming in Dresselstrasse, and as you can hear, there is a motorway, a railway line, and a lot of noise. But this house, number 3, is where Eva lived as a little baby. And that's where they used to go for a walk to that lake we just filmed. They lived on the first floor, and this shop used to be a grocery store. Now it's a little restaurant. Stormstrasse, it's quite a small street, and I'm filming because these are the roads, the pavements that Eva ran up and down as a child. She was telling us stories about how naughty they were, she and her friends. And at number 3, which is the White House on the left, or at least they lived on that site, although we think the house is probably new, is where they lived when Eva moved here at the age of 5 from Dresselstrasse. Strasse number 2 and number 2A. I think this is the original because it has features of Uncle Hans's era. He built this, and it's got that Art Deco feel about it that he liked. The site of number 34 Luitpoldstrasse, which is where Uncle Heinrich lived, but as you can see, it's a rather modern block, and it's rather unlikely to have been where he lived. Strasse. That house, number 25, was designed by Theodor Jaretzki. This is Chausseestrasse again. It's got a nice glass roof up there. And we've stopped here to look at number 63 and 64. This is 64. These two houses were designed by Uncle Hans, and that's 63 on the opposite corner. These balconies with the curved edges are typical of his style. One Rotenbachstrasse. No sooner sold than somebody's building a house on the plot of land, and good for them. That's it there, a little house being built on the Rotenbachstrasse plot. And I suppose the little wooden house is the one that people knew about previously. And this is Rotenbachstrasse, and there's Tim lamenting the sad loss of his property rights in Pankow. Stubenkammerstrasse, and this house, this with the curves and the graffiti, is another house that was designed by Uncle Hans. And you can see again that curved style that he was very fond of. Stubenkammer is not exactly a nice part, of course it's in what was East Berlin. Over on the far side over there, there's some very old places. This is Sophienstrasse number 19. It's been done up. It's been painted yellow and white, and of course it doesn't belong to us anymore. There's Eva and Pat. In this house, which is opposite number 19, it's number 20, because if I get close up, you see those pop marks? Those are remnants of bullet holes from the wall, which is still visible. Incredible. And here's the back view of number 19. And a view down Sophienstrasse with those familiar people crossing the road. And I'm coming around to number 216. This house here. Turning on and carrying on past, heading west on the Kidam. 216 is where Theodor Jaretzki lived, and at some point so did Lotte Jaretzki, my father's first wife. To get inside 216.
Can you take a walk up the stairs, do you think?
I won't walk up the stairs. This is the interior. It's a beautiful marble building. Just driving along the Arbors. This is part of an old pre-war racetrack heading south-west from Berlin. We're heading towards Wannsee.
Oh, look at the woods.
And poppies.
Yeah.
And we used to see these wonderful fields of poppies.
Yeah.
Red poppies on the side of the road. I don't know the road. They're vanished.
So what's that?
Well, they say that you cannot get inside.
Of course, it's speed restricted. It's not like you're doing 250 kilometers an hour nowadays. Great. This is Wernerstrasse, and this house is number 10, which is supposedly the house that Uncle Hans built, or at least it's been replaced with this one using the original foundations. But I'm told that it's more likely to be a house further down in the back of the garden, so we're going to go down there and find it. Looking through the garden at the back of the yellow house, and I think Eva is certain that this house is the one that we're talking about.
Yes, it was definitely a sloping.
Can you have a look here, Mum?
It was definitely
Over
a
here.
sloping roof.
Mum,
Just a minute, because Alex is so holy.
that is...
Just so that is
No, surely. There's a big veranda on the corner.
Here are some more memorials. And this section we're looking at, if we're looking straight ahead now, this is the wall. It's the round top. And this is what was called the Schandstreif, or shame strip. Sorry, the Todesstreif, I think it was the death strip. And if you tried to get across here, you got shot. And that's what's happened to these people. The forest of crosses. And it's terribly sad. 1,065 people were killed trying to cross the wall. There's a man protesting here that they're going to close this down and move it, or some sort. I don't know the details, but he's standing on his soapbox there complaining. And there is the little checkpoint house where it says US Army Checkpoint, which was the original Checkpoint Charlie. And of course, huge amounts of souvenir sales all around. The house on Checkpoint Charlie, it's a museum, and Pat and I may come and have a look here when we go to the Jewish Museum tomorrow. Oh, this is the famous new Holocaust memorial. consists of piles of stones, different heights, and it's supposed to be like waves. It isn't officially open yet, it's going to be open in May. It's not to everybody's taste, and I frankly don't see the point of it. But there we are, and we've seen it.
And they wanted to turn it into, there was discussion, they wanted to turn it
Just
into a
heading towards the
museum.
Siegersäule.
And
Which
they
museum?
said
Which
column.
museum you mean?
Hitler's bunker. And there was definitely
Biggerbridge,
spies
famous
was on
spy
No.
swap point between
Isn't it
East
lovely?
and West, as in Gary Powers, for example.
But my
This is
mother came to
wonderful.
Potsdam in '74 to do research in an archive. Ah, yeah, this is where we went to.
This is what-
The harbour. This is the famous Wannsee Conference House, where the decision was taken to exterminate and deport the Jews in Wannsee. This is the beautiful Wannsee Lake. How strange that something so horrible could be discussed in such a lovely location. Unfortunately, this house is full of tourists now and groups, which isn't really giving it a lot of thought and reflection. The stills you will see now are of the houses that we visited in Berlin, and I would give you the following information. Dresslerstrasse number 3, and I must apologise for the quality of these prints, but I was having a problem with my camera, was the home of Uncle Hans Jaretzki, his wife Grete, their children Klaus and Eva. Eva lived there as a small child, as a baby. Giesebrechtstrasse number 5 was designed by Theodor Jaretzki. Meinekestrasse number 2 was the family home of my grandfather Samuel, my grandmother Anna, Uncle Hans and my father Alfred. As far as I know, it was Samuel's last address. Mommsenstrasse 29. At some time this was the home of Alfred, and Lotte, later Lotte Lachmann, was born in this house. Zübelstrasse 29. Grete Jaretzki, née Jacobi, Eva's mother, and Klaus's mother, lived here as a child. Zübelstrasse 35 was another home of Samuel, Anna, Hans and Alfred. It may possibly have been designed by Theodor. Chausseestrasse 25. This house was designed by Theodor. Florastrasse 63 to 64. These houses were designed by Uncle Hans. You can see his curved balcony style. Luitpoldstrasse 34. Luitpoldstrasse 34 was the home of Uncle Heinrich at the time of his death, but as you can see, the house there is unlikely to have been the one in which he lived. Rodenbachstrasse 41 is one of the houses, or rather plot of land, that we sold and you can see a new house is going up on the old plot. Sophienstrasse 19, this is the other property which we sold, and you can see it has been tidied up, painted, and looks quite presentable now. Sturmstrasse number 3 is the family home of Uncle Hans, Grete, Klaus and Eva, and they lived there from Eva's age 5. The house was owned by Samuel and Theodore, and it was designed by Theodore. Stubenkammerstrasse number 7 was designed by Uncle Hans. And the last house, Wernerstrasse 10 to 10a, this house is either a house that was designed by Hans or is on the site thereof, and the Kreindler family lived there. This house is in Wannsee, to the southwest of Berlin.